Hello again, my name is Bill Stewart. Welcome back to our series on the major themes of Scripture. This topic and series is so important because it teaches us how to bring all Scripture together in such a way that we can verbalize it and express it to ourselves, giving us confidence in God's truth and express it to other people and help them as well. We're going through a fun series on the plan of God. Through all Scripture. So often we learn Scripture in such a way that we individual verses, but not the context that they're in, either the passage, but also in all of Scripture. God's Scripture, the Bible, is a unified text that's written over 2,000 years and marvelously contained into a progressive theme of the plan of salvation revealed to us and carried out by Jesus Christ. What a wonderful book of love and action towards us as man. So we started on the plan of God, talking about Genesis and the fall of Adam and the ultimate division of mankind, as Dwight Pentecost says, a wonderful former professor at Dallas Theological Seminary, who describes that there was a evil kingdom and a godly kingdom that began through Seth and through Cain, the sons of Adam and Eve, that progressed, and ultimately the bad guys won, the sons of Cain, and ultimately God determined to destroy this civilization. So twice now God has tried to give man a chance to obey him, and they failed both in the garden and through what's often called the age of innocence up to the time of Noah. So he asked Noah to build an ark. He did this over 120 years as a type of Christ. The judgment came quickly and destroyed mankind. And in a sense, through the baptism of the flood, as described in 1 Peter 3, Noah was saved and saved mankind, and a new mankind was developed. And from this, the Noahic Covenant was described to him, and mankind was recreated with an important prophecy that in Genesis 9, 27 to 29, that Messiah would come through the tents of Shem, one of the sons of Noah who rested in Palestine. His people rested in Palestine. So from this, a third chance developed for man to be obedient, and 70 nations developed out of the offspring of Noah. However, one nation in particular, Babel, was created, and the leaders, Nimrod and his associates, determined they could be equal to God. So they built a tower there to make themselves be equal to God, to replace God with their government, with their system. And in the Bible, really, Babylon came to describe a system of mankind, of government and commerce, that was against God and replacing God, that ultimately will be judged in Revelation 18, just before the return of Christ. So Babel was judged also by confusing the languages. If you know anything about languages, between Indo-European, Sanskrit, East Asian languages, must have been completely confused. These languages are so disparate in writing and structure between each other. So that way they could not communicate their evil plans to each other. So ultimately, God determined to try again and create his own people. And this is important. This is where he chose Abraham in Genesis 11 out of Ur of the Chaldees to leave his family and to go in faith to Palestine and to live there, and he blessed him richly. And there Abraham, who God chose to be the founding, in a sense, the founding father of us all who believe, was started and by a covenant called the Abrahamic Covenant. It's really this covenant, importantly, that is really the cornerstone of Scripture. Now, Christ is called the cornerstone later in prophecy, but what I mean by cornerstone here is that the completion of Scripture from then into eternity emanates from Abraham. And it's based on three promises that we read about in Genesis 12, 1 to 3, and are repeated in important verses in Genesis 15 and 17 and 21 at a minimum. So he promises Abraham first a son, Isaac. And this would be a miracle because Abraham and Sarah were quite old at the time. So it seemed impossible to them. But God gave them a son. And I think he gave him a son not only to start the beginning of that promises, but also as a sign to Abraham that the other two would be fulfilled by his power and his faithfulness. The second one is that he would be a king of a great nation, which would be Israel. So that is confirmed really in Genesis 17 by circumcision, and that his people would come out of this great nation, would come out of Abraham. But lastly, and most importantly, was that he would be a blessing to all people, which is Messiah. And this is confirmed in Genesis 21 and 22, that Messiah, his seed towards Messiah, would come through Isaac. And it was reconfirmed after Isaac was placed on the altar and God stopped him, recognizing he was willing to sacrifice his only son, only begotten son, and God replaced that with a ram. And Abraham had passed his last test of faithfulness, which was considered to him as righteousness, in the belief that he would get a son and the belief of the coming Messiah. So it is through Isaac then and through Abraham that Messiah would come and all peoples would be blessed. So really then the completion of Scripture is along two lines. One is the provision of Messiah through Israel, which will come about next in our tale, and then their completion of the promises of their kingdom at the end of times to Israel. God is faithful. And then the provision of Messiah, which will provide the opportunity of salvation to all people. Wow, what a wonderful plan. What a wonderful story. We know that God says in Ephesians 1 that his plan for salvation is out of love, wisdom, and knowledge to the praise of his glory. Come back next time. We'll start talking about Israel and the law and how God used them to bring his Messiah and salvation. Thanks for joining me today.